Welcome back to the Sim Hangar. Before we get started, a quick word from this video sponsor. Flight Sim Builder is an American-based company that provides navigational units such as the GNS 530 and 430 and G1000 for use with X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator. I have personally used these items and recommend them. If you'd like to know more, check out my videos, link in the notes below. These Flight Sim peripherals allow you to take advantage of the pop-out panels available. In the case of Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's auto-configures, and anything you can do in Sim, you can do with these units, and provides great tactile feedback, including twin rotary dials and push buttons, very reasonably priced in comparison to the competition. Link to Flight Sim Builder's website in the notes below. To answer some subscriber question, go to your Windows Start menu, then All Apps, and as part of the installation you'll find an A2A Simulations folder. That's where you'll find the manual. Check it out, it's very detailed, and you'll also find a utility you may find useful, the Comanche Input Configurator. This allows you to map some of the non-standard commands used to your selected peripheral. If you decide to do this, one word of advice, as it only displays one peripheral at a time, attach and configure peripheral by peripheral, one at a time. We're just climbing out of Rijeka and just passing 1,500 feet. Prop and throttle set for climb at about 800 feet per minute. And as we continue our climb, it's a great opportunity to have a look at the S-Tec 30 Autopilot. It's very different to what we're used to in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Let's just bring back the yoke quickly, and there we can see Autopilot disconnect and Alt engage, disengage. If you do hide the yoke, A2A very conveniently have left the same controls right here, so they're always accessible. To use the autopilot, step one is let's switch it on. As soon as you do, it'll light up like a Christmas tree and run through its own self-checks. When you do switch it on, nothing is activated. Switching it on is simply supplying power to the device. And what you're looking for is a green light that indicates everything's working and it's ready for use. The ST30 is a 2-axis autopilot, which in effect means it can control your lateral movements and altitude hold, but it does not include any pitch controls. It includes a number of different modes over and above altitude hold. There's ST, which is stability or stabilizer mode, which also has a bank or roll rate hold, heading hold, and both a high and low sensitivity tracking mode for your flight plans and for VORs, etc. And we'll be looking at that in more detail in this tutorial. Let's start off by having a look at the ST mode. It's activated by pressing this button in. Press it once and you'll see a yellow light above the ST to show you that it's now active. When engaged, this will attempt to level your wings, so in effect you'll maintain a constant direction, but once again note there's no pitch control. This you have to manage manually. As you can see, ST mode is engaged and we're continuing to climb. Whilst in ST mode, if you now rotate this dial left or right, this will put your aircraft into a bank or roll. I've turned the dial to the right and we're banking to the right. How far we rotate the dial will determine the degree of bank. Now turning it to the left, we'll enter a left bank. I'll rotate the dial a little further and you'll see we'll enter into a fairly steep bank. Currently it's around 30 degrees. Return the dial to the center position, which is indicated there with a small arrow, and once again you'll level off. But once again, note it does not control your pitch or your climb or descent. The autopilot will hold you in your selected bank until such time as you disengage the autopilot or rotate the dial accordingly. If I press the dial in again, the active mode changes from ST to HD or heading, and the aircraft will hold the heading. As I rotate the heading bug, so the aircraft will turn accordingly. This A2A aircraft is very realistic. You need to think ahead in using your autopilot, as the aircraft will turn progressively and not suddenly dive in the direction selected. We're now entering cruise. Fuel pump can go off and so can the landing lights. And I want to stay at 4,500 feet. I've overshot that slightly, so I will trim down just a fraction and tap off on the power to bring my altitude back to 4,500 and then trim to stabilize the aircraft more or less straight and level. Now going to select altitude hold, press that button, and when we do, on the S-Tec 30 we'll see a blue light appear indicating that alt hold has been engaged. To ensure you enter this mode successfully, you need to make sure you're more or less stable. If your altitude is changing rapidly, then the altitude mode may not engage. Best practice, get yourself straight and level, then enter the mode. As you can see on the GNS 530, we're on GPS mode and we have a flight plan. The autopilot can track our GPS route, and as you can see, we're heading to a VOR, Lima Sierra Juliet. It's about 30 nautical miles away, and the frequency is 108.45, and I have that frequency in the GPS. By pressing the button once again, the active mode will change to low sensitivity. Pressing it again, as I just did, will move it to high sensitivity tracking. The difference between low and high determines the responsiveness of the autopilot and its reaction to the input data. You would normally use the high mode, but the low mode would be used if, say, the VOR you were tracking was far away, the signal was weak. In such a circumstance, keeping it in high may mean that the autopilot's operating just too aggressively. But as mentioned, normal operations would be in high, and high mode is required for tracking an ILS. When planning on tracking your route, or perhaps a VOR, this autopilot operates very differently to those you're more familiar with in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Currently, we're tracking the magenta line. If you engage this mode and you're too far away from the magenta line or facing in the opposite direction, chances are, well, it just won't track. You need to be something in the region of 1 to 2 miles away from the magenta line at most, and if not heading directly towards the magenta line, you should only be a couple of degrees out. When you do engage, the autopilot will make slow and small adjustments, and initially you'll tend to snake along the line. The closer you get it aligned initially, the quicker it will settle down. Turning back to altitude hold, note the trim indicator is lighting up. The autopilot won't automatically trim the aircraft. You need to do this manually, and it's giving you an indication of the action required, that is, trim up or trim down. And when you do so, you should do it in fairly small increments. I've just applied trim down on a slow progressive basis until the light went out. We're still heading to Lima Sierra Juliet. The outbound radial it's indicating is 0 degrees on our GPS, so our inbound course would be about 180 degrees. I've just aligned the course indicator, and we're just a little under 25 nautical miles to go. Starting to pick up a little bit of turbulence, and I'm planning on descending at this point, and as this autopilot does not have pitch control, this has to be done manually. Press the altitude hold button again to disengage. The blue light goes out. Adjust my power and trim as necessary to start a descent. One quick point worth noting: when you're in tracking mode, your bank or roll controls is not active, and rotating the dial will have no impact on your current heading. We're now almost at our VOR, 1 nautical mile to go. Descended to 3,500 feet and altitude hold on. We're still in tracking mode. And note that our next leg is taking us in quite a different direction. It's a fairly sharp turn. Now in this case, the GPS continued to track, but this autopilot is relatively slow to turn you, and you're going to end up snaking left and right until you finally settle back on your route. There's a good chance it won't pick up the next leg and miss it completely. You can see on the attitude indicator we are starting to turn, but the bank is a slow and gradual one, so the recommended way of doing this when approaching a change in direction is to re-engage the heading mode, get yourself back on the magenta line, more or less lined up, and then re-engage the tracking. If the angle of change is too large, or perhaps multiple changes in direction over a short distance, the aircraft won't be able to track, and you could end up heading in the totally wrong direction. You have been warned. We're now heading to our destination. Zadar Airport in Croatia has a VOR 108.60. Again, looking at the GPS, outbound radial is 301. Let's now align our course needle. Our inbound course then will be the opposite of that, which will be 119 degrees, 119 degrees. There we go. We're currently tracking the magenta line. Let's change that by switching from GPS to V-lock. We're still in high sensitivity mode, more or less pointing in the right direction, and the autopilot is no longer tracking the magenta line, it's now tracking directly to the VOR. Once again on the attitude indicator we're seeing a slight bank to the left to keep us aligned. We have a planned landing at Zadar Airport in Croatia, Lima Delta, Zulu Delta, and we're planning to land on runway 13, and that is equipped with an ILS frequency 110.10. I'm going to put this in my nav radio and also into my GPS. It's not being picked up at the moment as we're too far away. We're now about 17 nautical miles away. ILS frequency is in my nav radio 110.10. I'm still in alt hold and still in VOR tracking, but it's time now to get us lined up for our ILS approach. You can see the ILS is active on our VOR ILS gauge here. This autopilot's not going to land the aircraft, but we do have a glide slope indicator, so we do have a good visual reference. So time to come out of tracking mode. I'm going to change to heading mode, and I'm going to turn to the left to start lining up with the runway. Initially I'm going to select a heading of about 70 degrees. That should do for now. I'm also going to make the ILS active on the GPS so I can more closely monitor my direction. That's changed and it's indicating ILS runway 13, India Zulu Delta. That's correct. Still in altitude hold, but having to trim down. We can see the indicator blinking away there, slowly trimming down until the light's extinguished. Now to align the course indicator on the HSI, runway heading is 132 degrees. And it's caught me off guard. The positional line is moving fairly quickly, so I'm adjusting my heading to realign and line up with the runway. I'll have to overcompensate and wait for the line to come back a little closer than I thought I was. Yep, I've overshot the lineup. Might need to just a little bit more. Just coming back a little bit on my power as well. And on the VOR gauge, I can see I'm a little off center and a little low, but I'll only start my descent when the horizontal line centers. And as mentioned before, there's no pitch control, so the descent will be done manually. The horizontal altitude indicator on the VOR ILS gauge is slowly starting to drop, so time to disengage altitude hold. Just going to let a little bit of speed bleed off here, then I'll start my descent. Just need to adjust my heading to do a final alignment. Then we'll be switching to tracking mode. It's recommended you use tracking mode high for any ILS approach. Pretty much centralized now, and in fact just off the nose we can see the runways in sight. So I'm now going to switch to tracking mode, although in reality, visibility permitting, you would probably turn the autopilot off at this stage and fly it in manually, using the VOR gauge purely as a reference. You can see the Comanche starting a bit of a snaking approach as it aligns, speed 130, altitude 2300, and starting the descent. Visibility is okay, so about 1,000 feet to go to runway. The aircraft still tracking and snaking its way in, so I'm now going to switch the autopilot off and we'll take this in manually from here. Just feeding in second stage of flaps, landing gear down, green and locked, fuel pump on, landing lights on, passenger in the back panicking, mixture rich, prop fully forward, speed coming up at 100, want to cross the threshold at about 90. Instruments have been guiding my approach to this point. From here I'll do it visually. Welcome to runway 13, Zadar Airport. Well, there we are, captains. It's an autopilot, but not as we know it. But knowing A2A, it's a highly accurate simulation of the real thing. I hope you found this useful and informative. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And if you haven't, don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Stay well. and bye for now.